Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper number 224. The purpose of our Digging Deeper moments is to take God's Word to God's world, and we're so glad that you've joined us. But if you would, please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I say this every week, but I want you to hear me. Please, if you have not subscribed, stop right where you are and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it will help us pass around messages like this to others. Thank you. We've been in a series called Lost in Translation, and so far we've looked at two reasons why I believe something is lost in the modern translation of Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, when they translate these verses as, "In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters." The first is timing. We've said, and we've seen in the first argument, is that the timing of when the modern translation began to move away from the traditional translation is suspicious. The second thing we looked at is the text itself. And we saw that the first word of the Hebrew Bible is marked with an accent mark that does not allow for this translation or the translation of "in the beginning when." You can take a look at that in last week's Digging Deeper moment for more information. The third reason I believe the modern translation loses something in the way that they translate it as "in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth" is the truth. The truth is you have to change the text to get the modern translation. And after 40 years of studying the Bible, I've learned that when scholars say you have to change the text to fit their opinions, you should run for the hills, or at least be suspicious. What's ironic is that when it comes to Genesis 1:1, suggesting that the text be changed undermines the very argument that scholars seem to be making. Because the underlying arguments for the modern translation is that this is how the Masoretes understood the text that they were copying from, "In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth." But saying that we need to change the text is really saying that the modern translation is how the Masoretes understood the original, which was a vowelless text. If that's what they meant, we wouldn't have to change the text. Again, the arguments among scholars is complicated, and I want you to know that I've thoroughly studied these arguments. And in fact, I plan to share these arguments with you in a couple of Digging Deeper moments. But as I filmed the first one, I realized that this kind of study is really too deep for the kind of messages we're trying to do on the Digging Deeper Moments series. And as I watched Jonathan's eyes glaze over as I went over the vowels and the accents in the Hebrew, I realized that maybe I need to take a different approach. However, Zondervan Academic's website has a great article that simplifies the technical side of this as about as well as you can. And speaking of the second word of Genesis 1:1, which is bara, they say, the Masorete scholars who worked around AD 500 to 1000 developed the Hebrew vowel pointing system most commonly used today to record how they pronounce the text. They pronounce it as bara. He created, or God created. This makes verse 1 a main clause. Most translations, hear that? Most translations follow the Masoretic pronunciation. And I would add most translations up through the first 1800 years of this era. They translated it, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Emphasis mine. They go on to say in unpointed text, and that would be the text that the Masoretes used. It had no vowels and it had no accents. They go on to say in an unpointed text and without a context, however, one cannot tell whether the word is to be pronounced bara, as the Masoretes did. Now, do you hear that? As the Masoretes did, or as baro, which would mean create, or as bore. So creating. So the non-traditional translations are taking the verb, this is what they say very carefully, the non-traditional translations are taking the verb as an infinitive construct. Now here's what they're saying. The argument for the modern translation rests upon changing the vowel pointing of the Masoretic text from bara to either baro or bare. The non-traditional translations are taking the verb as an infinitive construct. Now forget about what an infinitive construct is. I thought about doing a Digging Deeper lesson on it, but it's very complicated. Basically, it means to treat a verb like a noun, and you don't really need to know all that. What you need to know is that Zondervan is admitting that in order for the modern translation of Genesis 1:1 and 2, which is in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void and darkness covered the face of the deep while the wind from God swept over the face of the waters. In order to do that, you have to change the Masoretic text. And I would say, I'm sorry about this, but I call this cheating. To argue that the Masoretes took the text to mean in the beginning when, and then say we have to change the text to fit this translation is what I've been calling mud on our feet. They've got mud on their feet. And that's the point we've been making in this series, is that when we come into the text, we want to make sure that we're not influencing the text, either the translation or the interpretation, by a preconceived or something assumed, called a presupposition. And so if you want more of that information on what verses 1 through 2 say, I'd encourage you to go to Zondervan Academic's website, because they have a lot more to say, but it is complicated. It is complicated, and it's a lot like swimming through peanut butter. But for those of you geeks out there like me, you may want to take a look at it. But let me wrap up this series by saying this about the traditional translation of Genesis 1 and 2, which says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. This is the best translation. This is the best translation because it's been translated that by most scholars for 1,800 years. It fits what the Masoretic text states, and we don't have to change the text in order to come up with our translation. In short, it has less mud on its feet than the modern translation. Now, next week, we'll begin a new series on the book of Isaiah. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it yet, but we're going to be looking at chapters 1 through 12, and you're not going to want to miss it, because we are going to give you help and aids so you can read this book and begin to understand what Isaiah is saying. If this lesson's helped you, please share it with a friend. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out our Sunday morning live podcast on either Apple or Spotify. And hey, if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please make sure you do that, because it's going to help us in a big way. Thank you, and I hope to see you next week.